It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth, financial literacy educator and speaker, entrepreneur, and chairman of the board of Bank Information. Take charge of your financial future with Your Personal Bank. Now here's Ference Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. The first thing I want to say is I want to discuss or bring up, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Some of you are listening. It is 9/11. It might be after 9/11 when you're listening to this, because this show, it does air on several stations, or if you're listening to onto it online, which of course you can do at yourpersonalbank.com anytime you want, listen to the previously recorded shows. But what I want to say is, for those of us that remember 9/11, it was a pivotal event. It's kind of those once in a generational kind of events where you remember when you remember where you were when you heard about it. And folks I've talked to, of course, it was before my time, but they say the same thing about the JFK assassination, or folks older about Pearl Harbor would say that. And it's just one of those pivotal events. It's a shocking event. It was something that wasn't expected, if you know what I'm saying. And a couple of things about that, of course, is it did bring our country together for, sadly, a short period of time. But it did bring us together against a common enemy. We were united for a while, and that was a nice thing because, again, we had a common enemy. We went to war to punish those that were responsible. The thing is, though, since then, sadly, we've become ever more divided. And I would say, in my opinion, our country today is probably more divided than it's ever been, probably since the Civil War. There's a lot of reasons behind that, but where are we at 20 years later? First of all, I want to say this. It was there was universal respect. This is what's kind of interesting. 20 years ago, 9/11, put things in context to where we are now. There was just about universal respect for our first responders. The police, the firemen, many of the firemen in particular, ran into the burning building to try to save lives. Of course, lost their lives as a result. Look how we treat first responders today, particularly police in many parts of the country. Look at the difference just 20 years makes. It's shocking. But where are we 20 years later? Well, we went to war to punish those that were responsible. And I think most people felt like that was the right thing to do. The problem is it turned into the longest war in history. We were in Afghanistan for nearly 20 years. Osama bin Laden, we'd gotten him many years ago. The reasons for being there had disappeared. It was really an aimless, almost like an aimless war, I guess you could call it. There was really no clear direction. There's no exit strategy, obviously. And it's really sad that, we spent nearly $1 trillion on that war. And for what purpose? And that's just hard to measure, because it's really sad that there were many soldiers who fought bravely. Some gave their lives even. I'm not blaming the soldiers. They did their job, and they did their job really, really well, as they typically do. Our fighting men and women are amazing. The thing is, it's our leadership that's the problem. When you lack direction, you lack a plan, you lack a purpose, that's where the aimlessness comes in. And it really feels like it really became one of those things where the war was good for the military-industrial complex. People making a lot of money, building military stuff, right? Which we ended up giving a lot of it to the Taliban. But there was a lot of money being made, so that's why it seems to me that's why the war was continued on indefinitely. A lot of people have said we were there almost 20 years, and we were there like 19 years too long. And I think that's probably pretty accurate. Of course, the way we ended the war is probably the worst military decision maybe in the country's history. I mean, pulling out the military before you pull out the civilians in what's been a war zone for 20 years is an unfathomable decision. It's an unmitigated disaster. And there's really no one to point to, other than the leadership, which, including Biden, he states himself that he made the decision. The military leaders should be absolutely ashamed of themselves and should resign. They should just resign in disgrace. It's ridiculous. I was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, 3rd U.S. Infantry, the old guard. I was no military strategic genius by any stretch, but even I played in the band. I played at the White House and places like that, and I think I could have come up with a better plan than what was actually done. I think anybody could have. That's what's so infuriating about this. But anyway, so they made such a poor decision, of course. Where are we at? I'm getting off track here. Obviously, they put some military back in to try to secure an airport, to try to get some people out. Basically told them you had to get to the airport and we can't help you. Soldiers died. And thousands of U.S. citizens and allies have been left behind. Enemy lines, frankly. What was our enemy for 20 years, certainly. That those people my heart goes out to them. Our country has we've never done that before like that, where we've left U.S. citizens behind like that and just, left them to fend for themselves. The closest thing I can even come to is in World War II, like the Bataan March and things like that, where soldiers were left behind. Of course, we were in war, and we had no capability then of doing anything to help them. That's not the case right now. This was not based on military capability. This was based on really, really terrible decision-making by leadership, starting with Biden, first and foremost. That thousands of Americans and allies are stuck behind enemy lines. Their lives are literally in danger. My heart goes out to them. Pray for them. I don't know what else to do. It's embarrassing. It's saddening. It's frustrating. This is where we're at 20 years later. The Taliban is back in charge after 20 years. They were the government that supported more terrorism than any other group in the world. And guess what? They're back in business. So, very likely there's going to be more terrorism around the world going forward, and we are less safe as a result. That's pretty much the facts. And we have a southern border that's basically open. So you don't think the Taliban doesn't know that, and terrorists and would-be terrorists who want to cause damage to, what they consider the evil of the world. They hate America and everything we stand for. You don't think they have taken notice that our southern border is easily accessible? What could go wrong, right? That's where we are 20 years later. Now, what's interesting is now we've seen renewed attacks on civil liberties. Now, there's been consistent attacks by the Biden administration on our civil liberties, on our freedoms. I've been talking about those a lot on this show, of course. But I think a lot of the reason behind it, one, this is what they want to do, but this is a way for them to deflect from the Afghanistan disaster. You notice they can't wait to talk about something else to get away from this, because Afghanistan has become an unmitigated disaster that is just almost universally agreed upon. It doesn't matter whether you're right, left, or middle, what your political beliefs are. To leave people behind, leave U.S. citizens and allies behind, defend for themselves against an enemy that we've been at war with for 20 years, that's just a basic human decency thing. To think that's a good idea or any way positive, it's just it lacks human decency, right? But anyway, so we've gotten some renewed attacks on civil liberties, and this time they've gone, farther than anything I think we've ever seen. We have Biden now putting out a vaccine mandate, requiring it for all federal employees, contractors, and large employers. Now, this has to be wildly unconstitutional. Now, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but again, I am not a military strategist genius either to know that this is probably not going to fly. It's probably a terrible idea. But again, Biden doesn't seem to care about the Constitution, even though he swore an oath to defend the Constitution. Not very long ago, he extended the rent eviction moratorium, despite the fact himself even stating it was probably unconstitutional, but he did it anyway. Thankfully, about a month later, the Supreme Court shot it down. They had ruled on it previously. They shot it down again, thankfully. So we have a government still operating to a degree because there are three co-equal branches of government, thankfully. Thankfully, the founding fathers, I should say, saw the wisdom in this. Otherwise, gosh, what would things look like if we didn't have that? I know Biden doesn't care about, and the leadership doesn't care about the Constitution. But thankfully, we still live in a constitutional republic. And while we still have those rights, we need to stand up for those rights. I'm fortunate. I've decided not to take the vaccine. I've had COVID. I've shared the story. I was one of the early ones to have it. I got it before most people even knew what it was. My doctor didn't know what it was. We determined that later. I have the antibodies. Haven't had it since. I'm not a high-risk person on any of the measurements. My wife got it. My kids got it. We all came through fine. I got sick. No argument there. Was it like a bad flu? I tell this to everybody. It sucked. I wouldn't recommend it to. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But I was really sick for a couple of weeks, and then I got better. I was never afraid of dying or anything like that. It was a bad flu. And I was thankful that I did get it, got through it, and now that my body's natural immune system, has the antibodies and can fight it, and unlikely that I'll get it again. Or if I do, it'll be very mild. That's how our immune system is supposed to work. That's how viruses work. We've known that for decades. That's science, not this other propaganda that's been put out recently. But the fact that they're requiring, or they want to require people with private companies to get vaccinated, stick a needle in your arm whether you want to or not, whatever happened to our civil liberties? What happened to our freedoms, our constitutional guaranteed rights? See, they don't care. This is hugely important, folks. You're going to say, what's this have to do with my money? I'm going to really encourage you to stay tuned, because I'm going to share with you in the next segments why this has everything to do with your freedom and your money.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show, and we've been talking already a little bit about, 9/11, the war in Afghanistan, where we've been the last 20 years, how we came from a situation. I remember it distinctly. I remember the day that I saw the towers fall. I couldn't believe it. Those of you that, probably anyone over the age of probably 30, 35, probably remember this. It was a defining moment for our generation, or for a generation. And I thought, it was almost like a movie at first. And the fact I was glued to the TV screen for hours, as I think many were, because you just couldn't believe this actually happened. And the result from it, the country came together. We were united against a common enemy. The reason behind it wasn't good, but it felt good to be an American at that point. It felt good that we're all on the same side. And we went to war. We went after those that that were responsible. All that felt right. It was probably it was the right thing to do. It felt good. Sadly, it didn't last long. That unity, and ever since we've been coming apart, farther and farther apart, and it just seems like there's almost no end in sight. Of course, the end in sight is we just got to get these folks that are trying to tear our country apart, change the direction of what we are. Become a socialist, Marxist, dependency society instead of an land of opportunity that we've been for, centuries. Got to get them out of office, out of control, out of power. So that's going to take some doing, because they've been working on this for far longer than many of us realized. But that's the end result. That's the solution here. But as they continue, there's some positive sides to some of these things. And then, like I said, I'm going to get into how this affects the economy and our money and all those kinds of things too. So just stay tight. I'll get there, I promise. The thing is, there's some bright sides to all this because, again, I don't believe I think they firmly believe they're winning. Okay. And they don't believe that they're pushing too far. I think they're pushing way farther, a big overreach, much farther than the vast majority of Americans envisioned or want for this country. And, we're going to find out in the midterm elections next year how much they've overreached and what the reaction is by the American people. I still have hope that we're a freedom-loving people. Again, I guess I've struggled to understand this, and I think a lot of just normal everyday folks have struggled too to understand why is it there's some people in this world that seem to want to just dominate everything. And the reason I think that is because I love freedom so much. I do. I just automatically assume that others would want it also. But the reality is there are people out here that want control because they want power, and power gives them more money and all that stuff. That's a whole different discussion. Maybe I'll hit that on the next show. But the overreach that's happening, like this newest attack on our civil liberties, the one where Biden wants to have a vaccine mandate requiring federal employees, contractors, and large employers to require a vaccine or a test like every week, and the companies or the employee may have to pay for it. This, I firmly believe, is going to create a huge backlash. And it should. Here's the thing. Whether you believe in the vaccine or not, whether you think someone should be vaccinated or not, and first thing I'm going to say about that is that's a decision between you and your doctor. That's a medical decision each individual person should make for themselves, and I'm not for or against you getting a vaccine. That's a decision you need to make for yourself. You weigh the risk factors and to determine what's the best decision for you, just like any other decision in your life. The government has no business being involved in those kinds of decisions. Those are yours and yours alone. And if you don't believe that, then you're a socialist. You believe in socialism, and you want somebody to take care of you. Okay? It's just that simple. I don't know how else to mince the words, if you know what I'm trying to say. But the fact that now millions, tens of millions of Americans are going to be faced with the decision of, I either get this vaccine that I may or may not want, but I'm going to be forced to take this vaccine by a government or lose my job. That's, folks, that I genuinely never thought I'd see something like that coming in our country. Certainly not in my lifetime. See, that kind of stuff wouldn't surprise me in Cuba or North Korea or Russia. But here in the United States, in a constitutional representative republic, really? That the government is going to force people to take a vaccine, put a shot in their arm that they may or may not want, may or may not agree with? Doesn't matter if you agree with it or not, is my point. Doesn't matter if you think it's a good idea or not. The government has no right. Period. The Constitution spells it out directly. Anything not spelled explicitly pointed out as powers of the federal government are reserved for the states or the people. That is in the Constitution. Read it, folks. Read it. Love it. Own it. We need to stand up for our civil liberties. You know, back in the 50s and 60s, we had a civil rights movement because there was a segment of our population, rightly so, being disenfranchised, and they stood up for their rights. The African American community stood up for their rights, and at first they went up against there was a lot of pushback, but they ultimately eventually won, and I applaud them for it because many of them were not being treated fairly. This is no different. This is an attack on our civil liberties. If you're going to allow a government to tell you that you have to stick a needle in your arm, the government tell you to stick, you're going to acquiesce to that. See, this is time for, I'll just say it, it's time for civil disobedience. And if enough people stand up and say, no, enough already, and that's my hope. My hope is that is exactly what happens. They're going to be forced to step back and they're going to have to regroup. They can't make millions of people do this, okay? Now, we're going to see what happens. Obviously, this is going to go through the courts. There's probably going to be lawsuits flying everywhere. I can't imagine it being the court systems agreeing to this, saying it's got to be unconstitutional. I would think that. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but man, it's got to. The thing is, they're willing to do these things, knowing full well it's probably totally unconstitutional, but they want to do it because they want to grab power. They want to take over our lives. They want to take control. And that's the thing you need to understand. Taking control gives them more power gives them more money. The leaders, the people in charge. This type of thing, if allowed, will spread to literally every part of our lives. I was sharing in one of my shows last week where I was talking to my cousin who was in Hungary. I've heard my story. My dad escaped communist Hungary in 1956 with my uncle, his brother-in-law. So her dad and my dad escaped. She was 10 years old when she left. It took him 7 years to get his family out after he escaped. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to share the story, but I want to share with you what she said and why this is so important. Why freedom is so important. Why it affects every part of our lives, including our money. So don't miss it. This is super, super important.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to Your Personal Bank Show. If you were listening to the last segment, you heard me talking about how these attacks on our civil liberties, this vaccine mandate that Biden has proposed to include requiring vaccines for people who work for large employers, is an overreach of government power almost unlike anything we've seen. This is something that will affect tens of millions of people. They'll be forced to, if this goes through, they'll be forced to either stick a needle in their arm, whether they want to or not, whether they like it or not, whether they agree with it or not. That doesn't matter. They will be forced to by the government decree or lose their jobs. Now, what kind of country is that? That sounds like we're Soviet Russia to me, or communist Cuba. Or how about a dictatorship like North Korea? That's what this is. And so I was talking to my cousin, as I was sharing the last segment recently, this past week or so. She was in Hungary till she was 10 years old. Her dad and my dad escaped in 1956 from the Soviets, the Communist Party. They took over their country. There was an uprising. The uprising then failed. The Soviets came back in, rolled their tanks, and took back over, so they escaped. It took my uncle 7 years then to get my cousin out. She was 10 by then, and his family, his wife and kids. So she remembers a fair amount of things from the old country. And one thing she heard me talk about the show, and she says, people here in America don't get it. They think freedom is just it's just one of those things that's given to them. It's granted. They become it's so pervasive. We've had it for our lives. They just take it for granted. It'll always be there. And what they don't realize is this is a rare blessing that we've been given, these levels of freedoms. Some of the most free society we've in human history, literally, and that is a fact, plain and simple. And I said something to her. I mentioned where I talk about freedoms and how it ties to your money and how important it is the two to understand both. She was absolutely. Do people think they're going to actually, if the government takes over, do you think they're going to have any money or have any control? If they think so, they're fools. That was her statement. She's right. Here's what you need to understand. This is why it's so important. If the government can force you to stick a needle in your arm to take a vaccine, whether you want to or not, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, what else can they do? What's to say they can't take control of your IRA or 401k? Who created those types of things? It's the federal government. Who's to say they can't step in and take some of it or all of it? I'm not saying there's anything on the horizon at the moment. But what I want you to understand is, well, there probably is. We just don't know it yet, right? Look at all the things that have happened over the past couple of years and the overreach and the steps that our federal government has been trying to do and doing. And now with this vaccine mandate, oh my, are you kidding me? You know, a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people don't talk about it, and you can look it up. But after 08-09, a number of European countries, for example, including England, took a portion or all of people's IRAs or their equivalent of their IRAs and 401ks, or took the match part or those kinds of things because they needed the money for, well, financial reasons, right? What's to say our government, as it gets powerful enough, as it continues to reach into every part of our lives, what's to say it can't step in and say, you know what, we're going to take this account or this portion of the account for ourselves because we need it to redistribute or pay off some debt or do this or do that. What's to stop them? If they can force you to stick a needle in your arm, what's to stop them from doing that? What's the difference is my point. If one's unconstitutional, so is the other. Are our courts going to step in and stop this? I certainly hope so. I absolutely hope so because I believe this could be a tipping point. I'm not certain it is, and I'm not encouraging violence in any stretch of the matter, but I could see where if the court system doesn't step in, that this could create violence with some people. Some people who are just adamantly not going to allow the government to force them to stick a needle in their arm. Or they'll quit en masse. I don't know what's going to happen. But there needs to be some civil disobedience. It's time to step up and say enough's enough. You know, I'm fortunate. I don't work for a large corporation. I don't fall under this particular mandate, this vaccine mandate. And by the way, there's a lot of people like me that don't. And why should we care? Well, again, if they're willing to do it with large companies, what makes them, and they're going to do it under the auspices of OSHA, what's to stop them from then bringing it to small business owners? Or you see my point. What's to stop them? If you give them an inch, you're going to take a mile. We have to stop them in their tracks. Stay tuned in the next segment. We're going to talk about some good news. I'm giving you enough bad news today. There are some bright things about this that are coming up. So I want to talk about those next. So stay tuned and don't miss it.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. Back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. We are talking about attacks on our personal freedoms, our civil liberties, this most recent attack and this mask mandate that Biden has proposed, requiring, not mask mandate, vaccine mandate. He's done a bunch of those. Vaccine mandate, requiring people to get vaccines who work for large employers even, not even working for federal government or contractors. I'm not sure if they have a leg to stand on. But private enterprise, this has to be wildly unconstitutional. I think it's going to cause a tremendous amount of blowback and pushback. I hope it does. I hope maybe this is the straw. I mean, people are just getting fed up. You've got the all the things they've done, starting with the Keystone Pipeline shutdown, to all the things they've done, the mask mandates, everything else, the Afghanistan debacle, and now requiring people to stick needles in their arms, whether they want to or not, whether they have antibodies or not. I mean, this is ridiculous. I hope this is the time people finally stand up for their rights and say, no, enough's enough. I hope the court system shut this down hard. Otherwise, if they don't, I don't know. I could see bad stuff happening. I'm not encouraging it. I'm not encouraging violence in any way. But I can. There's going to be I've said this a while ago. There's going to be a point where people. There's always a spark, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, remember the Alamo. I remember the Alamo type moment, or a shot heard around the world moment, like in Concord, Massachusetts, when the British were coming and they said they were going to take their weapons, and they said no. And that started the Revolutionary War, which started our country, by the way. You know, there's going to be a spark. There's going to be a point. Is this it? This might be it, because this is going to affect tens of millions of people, and some of them are not going to put up with it. And they shouldn't. None of us should put up with it, is the point. I've been remiss. I got to really, if you want more information on your personal bank and how you can take control of your money, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com or 866-268-4422. Because like I said in the last segment, if the government is willing and able and actively trying to force people to stick needles in their arms, whether they want to or not, what's to stop them from, say, changing the rules on IRAs and 401ks, for example, or confiscating, frankly, some of the money or all of it? It happened, folks, back in 08-09 in several European countries. Their equivalent, similar to the IRAs and 401ks. A lot of people don't like to talk about that, but it did. What's to stop them from doing? They've been modeling a lot of the things they want to do off of that. So if you want to find out how you can protect your IRA and 401k money and get it out of the federal government control, because that's what it is. It's in the federal government system. That's who created the IRA and 401k, right? Congress. It's under their system. They make the rules. They may change the rules. If you want to get out of that system, contact me. Toll free, 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. I can show you how to get it out of that system, how to minimize the taxes, gain control of the money, maximize liquidity, have guarantees, create tax-free income, and get positive arbitrage all at the same time. Notice your money goes farther because, again, as inflation kicks in further and more, that's going to become more and more important. So here's some of the good news. I've given you enough of the bad news. You know, the one other thing, you know, we now have the DOJ and the government, all government on board, federal suing Texas and attacking Texas over the abortion law. Folks, it's not about the abortion law. This is the thing I hope people recognize, and they're educated enough to realize this. They've even stated that they're like, the federal government said, look, if Texas is able to get away with this, and other states will move on and do this and other things. Folks, this is a states' rights issue. It states in the Constitution, there's nowhere in the Constitution where the federal government has control over abortion or many other things that it deals with. This is a fight between the states' rights and federal government. My hope is, my firm hope is that the states win. Whether you agree with abortion or not, you should be on the side of the states, because that's how our Constitution is structured. Again, read it. It states in there, it delineates certain specific powers to the federal government, things like national defense. Look how good they are at that lately. Afghanistan's a great example. I'm not talking about the soldiers. I'm talking about the leadership. They talk about transportation, things like that. Look at our infrastructure. Nobody thinks it's great. It's not horrible, but it's not great. My point is this, but the point is in the Constitution it states, and any other powers are reserved for the states or the people. Folks, if you read the Constitution, it's very clear. Abortion or any other situation like that, the federal government has no business dealing with it. It's a state-by-state issue. Let the states deal with it. And look, I saw somebody point this out. I think there's 8 states in the country right now where abortion is legal up to the day of birth. And now there's 1 state where it's not. Okay, well, it's a balancing out. There should at least be 8 states that it's not, right? And if you agree with abortion or you don't, then you should migrate to that state, right? I mean, that's what makes sense. If you really adamantly, this is something that's really important to you, don't shove it down the throats of other people. We all have freedoms. So respect our freedoms. That's what liberalism with a small L is supporting the rights of people, whether it's popular or not. You know, liberals used to support freedoms, individual freedom, whether it was popular or not. Popularity of it is not the issue. It's not important. It's not a factor. It's a states' rights issue. And, the Supreme Court allowed the law to stand in place already. They've already ruled that, yet the DOJ is going to go after them anyway. So likely they'll lose. I hope that's the case. And then we'll see the beginning of states asserting their rights. They've been doing that slowly but surely through mass mandates and various things like that, asserting their rights and protecting the rights of their citizens. Hey, the federal government's not going to do it, then the state can do it, right? The states should have much, much more power than they do right now. They've given up a lot of their power, but they're finally starting to wake up to this fact. And again, this vaccine mandate has given some real, I think this has legs, is what I'm trying to say. Because immediately, the number of governments that have come out, the number of governors who have come out and stated they will pursue every legal option possible. They will fight this tooth and nail. The American dream has become a nightmare under President Biden and radical Democrats. My own governor in Arizona here says this is exactly the kind of big government overreach we've been trying so hard to prevent. Now they're hammering down on private business and individual freedoms in an unprecedented and dangerous way. I completely agree. There are governor after governor after governor who has come out and said, we will fight this. They're going to band together. Look, the states can work together and fight against the federal government. You know, there's a nuclear option, so to speak, there too. There is something in the Constitution that allows for a convention of states that can actually start a new government. It's happened twice. First time our country created a government with it was called the Confederation of States, and then later created the Constitution, which is our current government as it stands, our representative republic. You know, if it gets bad enough, that could happen. That could be a direction we see. I talked about that actually over a year ago, long before it was sort of a popular thing. But if we have a federal government that increasingly is becoming the enemy of personal freedom and are attacking us consistently over our rights, our federal government has gotten out of control, and they are not our friend. They're our enemy. And maybe our best friends might just be the states stepping together. We are the United States of America, and many of the states can unite and work together against the federal government, and they can prevail as long as the court system reads the Constitution, basically. It's not that complicated in most cases. So there is hope, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then one other piece of hope I guess I want to share with you is the article that Senator Joe Manchin wrote recently in the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to post that on our website, so if you don't have access to the Wall Street Journal, you can go to our website, read it, pass it on to whatever. But the title of the article is, Why I Won't Support Spending Another $3.5 Trillion. You know, this is a Democratic senator, but one of the very few moderate Democrats left, or at least willing to admit he is. How's that? I don't believe they've all disappeared. I think they've just been kowtowed by the radical left in their party. But here's one that's, at least his statement is this. Now, I don't know if he's going to follow through. My hope is fervently that he does. But some of the things he states in this article are incredibly encouraging. As he states, some in Congress have a strange belief there's an infinite supply of money to deal with any current or future crisis, and that spending trillions upon trillions have no negative consequences for the future. I disagree. I couldn't have said it better myself. He goes on, an overheating economy as opposed to a costly inflation tax on every middle and working class American. The debt is $2.87 trillion and growing, and the nation's debt has reached record levels. And he points out over the last 18 months, we spent more than $5 trillion responding to coronavirus. And now Democratic leaders propose to pass the largest single spending bill in history with no regard to rising inflation, crippling debt, or the inevitability of future crises. He is so right. He is dead on. And this is coming from a Democratic senator. I'm going to encourage you, if you haven't read this article, absolutely do so. Again, it's called Why I Won't Support Spending Another $3.5 Trillion. It was in the Wall Street Journal, Senator Joe Manchin. Or you can go to our website, yourpersonalbank.com, check it out. This is why this is so important. This isn't Republican. This is Joe Manchin. I wouldn't consider a fiscal conservative by any stretch of the imagination. But he is a Democratic senator from a very red state. And he does, as I've stated many times with politicians, they have priorities. The priorities are to get elected and then get reelected. I think he's read the tea leaves. I think he believes that if he supports this, he likely will not get reelected. So he's going to do what the majority of the people want, certainly from his state. And that's where our hope lies. Our hope for this country going forward lies in those moderate Democrats, those moderate Republicans, those independents who come to realize enough is enough. We can't just keep spending ourselves to oblivion. We can't carry debt like crazy and rising inflation and all these things that we're doing as a country and not destroy ourselves as a country. Next show, I'm going to talk about more of these things, the financial aspects of it. But one of them he even points out in this article, last thing I want to talk about is he mentions how Social Security and Medicare trustees have sounded the alarm that these programs will be insolvent and benefits could start being reduced as soon as 2026 for Medicare and 2033 for Social Security and then Medicare. So, yeah, 2033 for Social Security. I'm sorry. My point is simple. We cannot count on our federal government and potentially not even for Social Security and Medicare benefits, certainly not at the levels we've seen in the past. The trustees themselves have stated these programs, folks, 2026 is only 5 years from now. They're talking about Social Security having to be reduced in 5 years. If you're reliant on that types of incomes or counting on those kinds of income for the future to supplement retirement, you need to have an alternate plan. You need to contact me at yourpersonalbank.com and help you create a plan where you can get positive arbitrage, get your money to move, work farther for you. Call me at toll-free 866-268-4422. We are in unprecedented times, and we are talking about unprecedented results of what we're going to have to do. So contact me for more information, and I'll help you weather this storm and navigate these uncertain waters.
For more information on Your Personal Bank, feel free to contact Ference at yourpersonalbank.com. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guest on this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Products and riders may have limitations and may not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Compare when considering a replacement. Dividend rates and baseline of credit rates may change. Contact yourpersonalbank.com for current rates.